This is one big boy.
That's a big boy.
Ooh, trains.
Bro, I love trains so much you can't even imagine. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. And if you're new here, I'm the Transit Diaries, and I love making videos about transportation and urbanism. Today I will be visiting the National Military Transportation Museum, located in Williamsburg, Virginia. This museum is on the military property of the Eustis Langley Joint Military Base, also close to the CIA headquarters. This base, which was built in 1917, also hosts the museum on its property. And because it's on military-based property, the process of entering the museum is actually a bit more complex than most museums. Of course, I didn't record anything on military-based property, but basically, it's like passport control. You have to wait in a line and then you get your ID checked. And then you go through an inspection tent where troops inspect your car and then through another ID check. And then when the entire process is finally over, you are able to visit the museum, which is on the base's property. Without further ado, let's check out the museum. Quick disclaimer that recording on museum property is allowed, as it is a public entity that is just on a military base. Despite being on a base, this place has a nice, peaceful atmosphere, with greenery and a plaque honoring soldiers. This plaza has a large plaque towards a person who contributed a lot to military transportation, and bricks honoring other soldiers. Right outside of the museum's entrance is what looks to be a helicopter or an airplane wheel, along with the front of a helicopter, which is pretty cool for a museum entrance. Now, this transportation museum has a ton of stuff, but I will primarily be focusing on the railway aspect of this museum, as that is what my channel is mostly about. Since this is a large military base, it has its own railway network that branches off of a railway main line. It also has a rail yard that is used for museum purposes. In one of the entrance rooms, there is a diagram and a miniature model showing the evolution of military transportation, along with a mini railroad model, which is really awesome. It takes a very long time to assemble, paint, set up, and detail miniature models like this, so my respect goes out to whoever worked hard to make this happen. This room also has a ton of posters that were used for recruiting and other purposes. Here we can even see a poster that was made for this fort, and many other posters that are very cool. Posters of the U.S. Transportation Corps, and here we can even see a Union Pacific Railway poster talking about the backbone of the supply chain, which are the railways. Here's another poster promoting engagement in the railways, a poster telling people to leave tickets for soldiers, a poster telling people to use their tires all the way until the end, posters encouraging people to join the Army transportation sector and become mechanics, and of course, what can be a military poster room without Uncle Sam. There's also a very interesting exhibit explaining the story about how standard gauge came about and the evolution of rails. For instance, here is an early strop rail, which is just a wooden beam with a metal plate, and then over here is a U and a T rail. Over here we can see the old U-style rail and T-style rail. The U-style rail is to the left and the T-style rail is to the right. The T-rail, even though it is the modern rail, back then during the Civil War it was made from soft iron instead of steel and wore down really quickly, and it was replaced by the inferior U-rail. Of course, it was later replaced by the now modern-day T-rail. Over here, we can see the original strap rail, which was actually originally a wooden beam meant to carry horse carriages. Then it had iron placed on it so that it could last longer and so it had less rolling resistance. Then eventually it was replaced with trains and the modern-day T-rail. And that's why sometimes the train is nicknamed the Iron Horse. Now you learned something cool and new today. It's cool to see how almost everything designed in terms of vehicles evolved from the horse and cart, with cars and trains and everything else. If you'd like me to make a video on the history of railroad tracks, please let me know in the comments below. Here is a showcase of the logistics base that was built in Petersburg, Virginia by the U.S. Military Railroad Construction Corps. Here you can see a decent rail yard that was constructed in order to ship freight from the ships into the mainland. This rail yard was built during the American Civil War. Over here is one of the early generation US military trucks. Look at those small headlights on the sides, and then it's paired with a large headlight in the middle. This was also back when you had to crank trucks in order to start them.
Wake up! Wake up!
And of course, with more trucks, you need more recruitment posters. There were so many cool things in the museum that not all of them were able to make the cut, so here's a little montage of all the cool things that weren't able to make it in the video.
This is one big boy.
This is quite an interesting catalog of wartime era railroad photos. And next up is an exhibit of a wartime era railroad adaptation using trains. Or should I say, a vehicle. This is a Willys Jeep adapted for the railroads. The axle was 1,435 millimeters long, which meant that if the tires were taken off, it could be used on standard gauge railways. This Jeep could be used as a locomotive and haul a 20-ton rail car, which could carry soldiers in the back and be used as a mass transportation system for soldiers. Of course, the rail car had to have its own brakes, as the Jeep did not have near enough power to stop an entire rail car behind it. This was especially useful in muddy conditions when it was really hard to drive. They could just put the car on the rails and it essentially acted as a super highway. Unfortunately, if you hear a locomotive horn from a distance, it's probably too late because you can't brake and take everything off the rails. This car was used by Allied forces. As you can see in the top right photo of this display, a British and an American rail Jeep meet each other on the rails, thankfully not colliding head to head as they saw each other from a distance. You can also see a Jeep pulling a rail car. Over here we have a soldier during World War II changing out the discs for the railway standard discs. These Jeeps were used from World War II all the way through to the Korean conflict. Speaking of the Korean War, there are actually a few displays in this museum showcasing the military railroads during the Korean War. Let's check them out. Here is an information panel displaying all the railway army units in Korea and Japan during the conflict. There were drivers, repairmen, depot workers, and many other people. Over here is a map of the Korean railway system during the conflict. As you can see, the Korean railway system is pretty large and is largely electrified as well. My favorite part of this mini exhibit is this diagram of a depot that the US Army was working in during the Korean War. I absolutely love diagrams, and I think that this is a really cool diagram, and it's a very complex depot and interesting to look at. There are so many tracks, and it probably is very impressive to look at in real life. All major rolling stock repairs were carried out at this facility, and that's why it's so big. This museum also has a really cool rail yard with tons of military-era trains and wagons. This video is getting a bit long though, so I'm not able to show it in this video. But if you do want this video to be released, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. I'm the Transit Diaries, and as always, stay tuned for more.